Have you ever witnessed a single moment so unjust, so heartbreaking that it changed everything in the blink of an eye? Picture this, a hard-working black single mother, exhausted from juggling 2 jobs, suddenly finds herself pinned against her car by officers sworn to protect and serve. Her teenage son, forced to watch his mother's dignity stripped away, makes a desperate phone call that sends shockwaves all the way to the mayor's office, where the most unexpected voice answers. Today we dive into a true roller coaster of drama, compassion, and hard-fought justice that proves sometimes the loudest call for change can come from the youngest among us. Ebony Rogers, a 36-year-old single mother, stirred a spoon through her coffee cup one chilly morning in Chicago. The wind rattled the windows of her small second-floor apartment in the Chatham neighborhood. As she listened to the howling gusts outside, she mentally prepared for another day, another long shift at the nursing home, and then a quick change of clothes before heading to her second job as a home health aide. Bills covered the kitchen table in neat, worry-inducing stacks. Ebony squinted at the overdue notices and sighed. The water bill, the electricity bill, and one for the car insurance that was dangerously close to lapsing. She needed that car to get to and from work, especially when late hours made public transportation less safe. Ma called her 14-year-old son Malcolm from the tiny bedroom the two shared. He had a separate twin bed crammed in the corner, but the bedroom was more like a corridor that led to the closet. Despite the cramped space, Ebony and Malcolm had carved out a world of their own, one full of challenges, but also the warmth of their bond. Malcolm emerged, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. He was tall for his age, his limbs awkward like a tree that had outgrown its pot. His hair was neat and trimmed, and Ebony insisted on him wearing presentable clothes, even if they weren't brand new. That morning he wore his usual second-hand jeans and an old Bulls hoodie, perfectly acceptable to him, especially when half of his mind was still on last night's homework. "You ready, baby?" Ebony asked him. He nodded, yawned, and reached for the cereal box. She glanced at the clock, 6:30 a.m. She needed to leave in 20 minutes if she was going to drop Malcolm off at his school, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., middle school, before heading to her shift. Standing in the narrow hallway, she grabbed her coat, a thick black puffer, and guided Malcolm out the door. Outside, the wind stung their cheeks as they hurried down 2 flights of stairs. Ebony's beat-up Honda Civic, a 2008 model with peeling paint, was covered in a light dusting of snow. She turned on the engine to warm it up, her breath visible in the biting air. "No matter how cold it gets, I'm always grateful. We have each other," she said, quietly. But the thought that soared through her mind was worry. Would her paycheck this week be enough to cover rent on time? Malcolm sat next to her, rummaging through his backpack for a book to read on the short drive. Ebony slowly pulled out of the lot, careful not to slide on the icy pavement. As the Civic rattled onto the main road, Ebony took a detour through a side street to avoid heavy traffic. She was already running late. Her phone buzzed, showing a notification reminding her of her second shift that evening. It felt like a quiet warning her life was on a razor's edge, a delicate balance between exhaustion, worry, and unwavering love for her son. Malcolm turned on the radio. The local morning news anchor's voice crackled through. And in today's headlines, community leaders call for a review of police policies after another round of complaints. She reached over and turned it down. She'd seen enough stories like that on TV. It felt too close to home. They stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru, one real detail. Ebony felt anchored her day. She actually sighed in relief that they had enough points on the app to get a free hash brown with their coffee and hot chocolate, a small treat they shared in the morning rush. "Thanks for breakfast, Ma," Malcolm said, smiling in that sincere way only a teenager who knows you're stretching every dollar can. It was at that moment Ebony wished she could give her son more stability, more comfort, more of everything. She settled for ruffling his hair, focusing on the road as they continued on. Halfway to Malcolm's school, Ebony spotted flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror. Confusion rippled through her. She wasn't speeding, her turn signals were functioning, and she hadn't run any red lights. Yet the police car behind her signaled for her to pull over. "What did you do?" Malcolm asked, voice tight with concern. Ebony shook her head. "I don't know, baby." She guided the car to the curb. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. She rolled down the window, a swirl of cold air rushing in as one of them approached the driver's side. "License and registration," the officer said sharply. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark aviator glasses despite the winter gloom. His face was impassive lips, a stern line. Ebony's heart thudded. She handed over her license, her hands trembling. She fumbled in the glove compartment for the registration, hyper-aware of her son's fearful eyes. "What's the problem?" Officer Ebony managed to ask. He took her documents without answering and walked back to his cruiser. The second officer, a short, tense man with a pinched face, hovered close by, peering into the car. Malcolm looked petrified, shoulders hunched. "It's cold," he whispered, noticing the open window. Ebony nodded. She didn't dare roll it up. In every news clip she'd seen, or every story she'd heard, any sudden move could escalate a situation. She kept her hands firmly on the steering wheel, fighting the panic rising in her chest. After what felt like an eternity, the tall officer returned. He handed her the license and registration back. "You know your insurance is expired, right?" Ebony's stomach dropped. She'd just gotten the notice. She was behind on payments and was planning to renew next paycheck. But the fact was, she was currently driving without valid insurance. "Officer I," she began, voice trembling. "I lost hours at my job recently. My insurance lapsed. I'm so sorry. I'll renew it by the end of this week." The officer leaned closer to the window, his voice cold. "Sorry doesn't cut it. Step out of the vehicle." Panic surged through Ebony. She glanced at her son, then back to the officer. "Look, officer, please, this is a misunderstanding. I just need a little time." He rapped his knuckles on the door. "Ma'am, you're driving uninsured. That's a violation. Step out." Reluctantly, Ebony unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. The officer guided her to the back of the car. The second officer moved to the passenger side, opening the door and telling Malcolm to stay put. Standing behind her car in the biting wind, Ebony shivered from anxiety and cold. The tall officer demanded she place her hands on the trunk. She complied, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "Officer, there's no need for this," she pleaded. "I just dropped my son off at school. I'm just trying to get to work." In the corner of her vision, she saw the shorter officer rummaging through the passenger side. Malcolm's eyes were wide, desperate, locked on his mother, as though she were being hauled away to some unknown fate. "Be quiet," the tall officer barked, pressing Ebony's forearms onto the trunk harder. "We have reports of increased narcotics in this area. Where are you headed, really?" That question rattled Ebony. She was a nurse's aide, not some gangster. Anger flared, but she had to suppress it, knowing any sudden reaction could cost her dearly. "I have to work," she repeated softly, tears threatening to roll down her cheeks. His grip tightened. "We're gonna run the plates. This car might be impounded." Impounded? The word echoed in Ebony's mind like a judge's gavel. How was she supposed to get to work, or pick up Malcolm, or pay her bills if they took her car? She wanted to scream, but fear strangled her voice. Meanwhile, Malcolm looked around, debating whether to get out and protest. But even at 14, he knew from his mother's warnings that stepping out when the police had told him to stay put could escalate things in a terrifying way. He reached for his phone, tears of fury and fear in his eyes. The icy wind cut through Malcolm's hoodie as he sat trembling in the passenger seat, eyes wide, knuckles white as he gripped his phone. Outside, his mother was pinned against the cold metal trunk of their beat-up Honda Civic. Her arms twisted painfully behind her. Her puffer jacket had ridden up, exposing the back of her thin scrubs, and the tall officer's gloved hand was pressed hard between her shoulder blades. Malcolm's heart pounded in his chest like a drum. Everything was happening so fast, and he didn't understand why. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just trying to get to school and work just like every other morning. But now the morning felt like a nightmare. He wanted to scream at the officers, to demand they let his mom go. But Ebony's voice echoed in his head from countless conversations over the years. "Never argue with police. Don't make sudden moves. Don't raise your voice. Just stay calm, baby." His hand shook as he stared at the lock screen of his phone. The officers hadn't noticed him yet. At least, not really. The shorter one had peered in earlier, barked at him to stay put, and now stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, scanning the street as if daring anyone to question what was happening. Malcolm looked back at his mother. She was crying now, her head bowed. Her words were muffled, but he could tell she was pleading, probably explaining about the lapsed insurance, how she was trying to get it renewed. But the tall cop didn't seem to care. He just shoved her harder, making her gasp. Something snapped in Malcolm's chest. He couldn't sit still anymore. With a shaky breath, he unlocked his phone and opened the contacts. His thumb hovered over the crisis hotline number his mom had programmed for him. She'd told him he could call it if he ever felt unsafe. But when he pressed it, the line rang once, and then went straight to voicemail. Malcolm's heart sank. He didn't have time to leave a message. He needed someone, anyone, to listen now. Then a memory flashed in his mind. A few months ago, he had done a civics project at school on local government. As part of it, he had visited the city's website and found the contact number for the mayor's office. He had even joked with his mom after dinner. "We should just call the mayor if stuff ever goes sideways." She'd laughed and said, "He's got bigger fish to fry than us, baby." But now, in the raw panic of this moment, that silly joke suddenly became his only lifeline. Frantically, he opened the browser and typed Chicago mayor's office phone number. The city website loaded slower than usual. His fingers were clumsy with nerves. When the number appeared on the screen, he didn't hesitate. He tapped call. The phone rang and rang. Then click. Chicago City Hall. "How may I direct your call?" Came a calm female voice. Malcolm's voice cracked as he whispered into the receiver. "I need to speak to the mayor. Please, it's urgent." The receptionist hesitated. "Can I ask what this is regarding?" "My mum," he choked out. "The police pulled us over. They're hurting her. She didn't do anything wrong. Please, I'm just a kid. I need help." The line went quiet for a beat. "What's your name?" the woman asked more gently. "Malcolm. Malcolm Rogers." "Okay, Malcolm. Stay on the line for me, all right?" His breath caught in his throat. Was she going to hang up? Would she pass him to someone else? He didn't know what to expect. The next voice on the line nearly made him drop the phone. "This is Mayor Jackson. Who am I speaking with?" Malcolm froze. His mind blanked for a second. He had never imagined he'd actually get through, much less to the mayor himself. This is Malcolm," he stammered. "Malcolm Rogers. My mum's Ebony Rogers. The police. They stopped us. They said her insurance expired, and now they've got her outside the car. They shoved her against the trunk. I think they're gonna arrest her, and she didn't do anything. She's crying. Please." His voice cracked into sobs. He wiped his nose with his sleeve, his other hand still clutching the phone. The mayor's voice lowered. "Where are you, Malcolm? Can you give me a street or intersection?" Malcolm looked around wildly. They had just passed 79th Street. "We're near 79th and King Drive, near that old corner store. Please, can you send someone?" "She's not a criminal. I'm going to stay on the line with you, all right," the mayor said. "I'm alerting someone right now. Don't leave the car. Don't confront the officers. Just stay where you are." Malcolm nodded, even though the mayor couldn't see him. Okay. Outside, the shorter officer had walked away to speak with someone on the radio. The taller one was now handcuffing Ebony. Malcolm pressed his forehead against the window, watching in disbelief as the metal clicked shut around her wrists. He gritted his teeth. He wanted to run out and push them off her. He wanted to scream, to fight. But he stayed rooted in place, the phone against his ear, listening to the steady presence of Mayor Jackson. Minutes felt like hours. Then a second police cruiser arrived, lights flashing. Malcolm's breath caught. From inside the new car, a sergeant stepped out, older, more competent than the first two officers. He glanced toward the Civic, and then strode toward the scene with purpose. Malcolm watched as the new officer spoke to the others. Voices were raised. The taller cop gestured angrily toward Ebony. The sergeant shook his head and said something firm. Then, without warning, he turned to the tall officer and barked an order Malcolm couldn't hear, but he saw the result. The tall officer scowled, then reluctantly reached forward and unlocked the handcuffs. Ebony staggered a little, her arms falling to her sides. Malcolm pushed the door open and bolted from the car phone, still in hand. He didn't care any more about what the officers said. He ran straight to his mom and threw his arms around her waist. She gasped softly, then wrapped him tight in return, her face buried in his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with tears. "Thank you for being brave." He didn't feel brave. He felt terrified. But he also felt something else, powerful. For the first time in his life, Malcolm realized that even someone like him, a scared kid with a phone and a heart full of fear, could be heard, could matter, could change everything. Back behind the Honda Ebony was speechless with anger and humiliation. The tall officer's hand pressed her face close to the cold metal of her car's trunk. Her heart pounded with panic images of Malcolm's future, her job security, and her entire life precariously teetered. Then another police cruiser arrived. Ebony's heart sank further. More officers. This must be it, she thought. They'd impound her car, possibly arrest her, and she'd lose everything. But something unexpected happened. From the second cruiser, a sergeant stepped out. Ebony couldn't see his expression, but the two original officers released her almost immediately. She stumbled back, catching her balance. "Is there a problem?" the sergeant asked, voice resonating with authority. "We found a driver with expired insurance," the tall officer explained, though he sounded suddenly cautious. The sergeant eyed Ebony's trembling frame, her handcuffed wrists. Why is she cuffed and being held like this? The shorter officer shifted on his feet. "We suspected possible contraband, narcotics." The sergeant's gaze darted to Ebony's face. "Did you find anything?" The shorter officer shook his head sheepishly. "No." Ebony wanted to scream. "Of course not. Because I'm not a criminal." The sergeant's radio crackled. He pressed it to his ear, listening for a moment. His eyes widened, and he glanced at Ebony and the two officers. Then, surprisingly, he said, "Uncuff her. Now." The tall officer hesitated, but the sergeant barked the order again. He removed the handcuffs, and Ebony's arms fell to her sides, numb. "This woman has no outstanding warrants. She's no threat," the sergeant declared, though Ebony wasn't sure how he suddenly knew that. In reality, the mayor's office had rapidly reached the police chief's office, which then radioed a high-level order: "Stand down, do not escalate, ensure the well-being of Ebony Rogers." The mayor's staff was on the line with the district commander, who had quickly informed the nearest sergeant to intervene. The two officers exchanged glances, clearly annoyed. But the sergeant gave them a look that brooked no argument. "There will be an internal review," the sergeant said softly to Ebony, handing her back her license and registration. "You should talk to a lawyer if you feel you've been mistreated." Ebony blinked, tears streaming down her cheeks in the cold wind. She felt simultaneously relieved and stunned. She was free to go, but her car was still going to be impounded. Her insurance was expired after all. The officers told her she couldn't legally drive away in it. She cringed, thinking of how she'd get to her job, how she'd afford to get her car out of impound. But at least she was no longer handcuffed or facing worse. Malcolm rushed out of the car and flung his arms around his mother phone, still in hand. She held him tight, burying her face in his hair, whispering, "Thank you for being brave." By the time everything settled, Ebony stood on the sidewalk with Malcolm watching the Honda Civic get towed away. A flurry of snow drifted down, as if the city itself mourned her plight. She found it ironic that they could tear her life apart so casually on a routine morning. Nearby, an older black woman approached, having witnessed some of the confrontation from her stoop. "Child, are you okay?" she asked Ebony gently. Ebony nodded in a daze. I'm not sure." Malcolm's phone clutched in his hand. Said, "Mum, I called the mayor. I think someone from his office might help." Ebony stared at him, incredulous. "You what?" He nodded, tears drying on his cheeks. "I did. He told me not to hang up. Then I guess someone called that sergeant." A swirl of complicated emotions enveloped Ebony. On one hand, she was upset that her child had seen her humiliated this way. On the other, she felt an overwhelming surge of love and pride that he had the nerve to pick up the phone and do something. She took Malcolm's hand, and they began walking. They had no car, no ride, and she was almost certainly going to miss her first shift. But she needed to get Malcolm to school. That was non-negotiable. On the way, Ebony's phone vibrated. She checked the screen, a number she didn't recognize. She answered, bracing herself for more bad news. "Hello, Ms. Rogers. This is Mayor John Jackson." The hair on the back of her neck stood up, as if she were experiencing something surreal. Malcolm gave her a look. He could hear the voice from where he walked beside her. "Your son called me," the mayor continued. "I heard about what happened. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning so we can speak more about this incident?" Ebony's mind whirled. She didn't even have a car to drive now. She stammered her reply. Yes, sir. I thank you. I'll try." She hung up her heart, hammering, unsure of how to process what was happening. The mayor. She had lived in the same city all her life, and the idea of actually meeting him face to face had always seemed like some distant reality reserved for the wealthy or the politically connected. But apparently, her son's phone call had triggered a chain reaction. Later that afternoon, Ebony managed to borrow a neighbor's car to get to her shift. She'd already missed half of it, but needed the hours she could salvage. The nursing home supervisor, Ms. Alvarez, was sympathetic once Ebony explained the situation. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically completing her tasks, checking residents' vitals, distributing medication, helping with their meals. Her mind, however, remained stuck on that moment when the officers pinned her down. It replayed in her head an endless loop of humiliation and fear. When her shift ended, Ebony called for an Uber to take her home. She prayed the trip wouldn't be too expensive. The day's stress was etched into her body, and every muscle ached. Arriving home, she found Malcolm waiting anxiously on the couch, a pile of homework untouched. As soon as she walked through the door, he sprang up, hugging her again. "Ma, did you talk to the mayor?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her face still numb. "I have to meet him tomorrow morning." Malcolm's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. "Then everything's going to be okay, right? He'll get your car back." Ebony let out a shaky sigh. She remembered the mayor's invitation, but she didn't know if it came with any guarantees. "I don't know, baby. We'll see." She went to the kitchen, rummaging for something to eat. The fridge was almost bare, so she microwaved leftover pasta. As she ate, she decided she needed to do something else, talk to an attorney or a community advocate. She couldn't let this pass without pushing back. She picked up her phone, searching for local resources. She'd heard of the Chicago Community Justice Coalition, an organization that helped people who felt they'd been profiled or mistreated by law enforcement. She'd once seen them on local news. Maybe it was time to reach out. But as Ebony dialed their number, it clicked to voicemail. She left a brief, shaky message, then set the phone down, trying to quell the anxiety surging through her. The next morning, Ebony woke Malcolm early. Thankfully, it was the weekend he didn't have school. She decided to take him with her to City Hall, though she wasn't sure if he'd be allowed in the meeting. She simply didn't want to leave him alone, not after the trauma they'd both experienced. They boarded a CTA bus, winding through Chicago's streets. Malcolm stared out the window while Ebony sat rigid, trying to still the trembling in her stomach. The city looked the same as always. Towering buildings, busy sidewalks, the iconic sights like the L trains overhead. But her perspective had changed. She felt vulnerable, yet somehow determined. They finally reached City Hall, an imposing stone building downtown. Ebony had only been there once before to handle some paperwork when she moved apartments. Now she was ascending the grand staircase for a meeting with the mayor himself. At the receptionist's desk, Ebony explained her appointment. The woman behind the counter nodded and made a quick phone call. A security guard escorted Ebony and Malcolm to an elevator, which whisked them up several floors. In a modest conference room, wood-paneled walls, a large round table. Mayor John Jackson waited. He was a tall man in his 50s with a stern but thoughtful expression. His staff of 2 aides, hovered nearby, tablets in hand. Malcolm tensed, practically hiding behind his mother's coat. Ebony cleared her throat, stepping forward. "Mayor Jackson," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I'm Ebony Rogers. This is my son, Malcolm." The mayor extended a hand, first to Ebony, then to Malcolm. Ebony was struck by the warmth in his grip, a surprising kindness she hadn't expected from a politician. "Please take a seat," the mayor said. He signaled to his aides, who stepped out, leaving him alone with Ebony and Malcolm. I wanted some privacy for this conversation. Ebony and Malcolm sat down, Ebony clutching her purse anxiously. "I heard about your experience," the mayor began. "Malcolm here called and described what happened. I want you to know I've already spoken with the police chief, and there's an internal investigation underway." Ebony let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I don't just want an investigation. I want those officers held accountable, and I need my car for work, or I can't pay my bills." The mayor nodded gravely. "I understand your frustration. There's a process, and it can be slow. But I want to help you navigate it. I also want to hear your story, what led up to it and how it escalated." Her voice wavered as she recounted the events, starting from the moment she saw the flashing lights to the humiliating moment she was handcuffed. Malcolm chimed in with how he felt watching his mother in distress. When they finished, the mayor's brow furrowed. "This is unacceptable. I became mayor to address these kinds of issues. You shouldn't have to fear for your safety over a lapse in car insurance." Ebony felt tears again, a mixture of relief and lingering anger. She wiped at her eyes. "I'm a single mum, sir. I work 2 jobs. I'm behind on bills. I don't want special treatment, I just want justice. This shouldn't happen to me or anyone else." Mayor Jackson leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. "I agree. Listen, I can't interfere in the official investigation, but I can connect you with resources. Do you have legal representation?" She shook her head. "No. I tried calling the Chicago Community Justice Coalition. No luck yet." The mayor made a note on a small pad. "I'll have one of my aides follow up with them. In the meantime, I'll see what can be done about your car. Since it's uninsured, it's in police impound. But I might be able to expedite the process, so you can retrieve it once you renew your insurance." Ebony looked at Malcolm, who squeezed her hand under the table. "Thank you," she managed. "That would help a lot." The mayor studied them both. "But I also want something from you, if you don't mind." Ebony stiffened. She wasn't sure what to expect. He continued, "I'd like you to speak at an upcoming town hall meeting about your experience. We're trying to push for reforms in the police department, and real stories like yours can make a difference. Too often we hear about these incidents secondhand. It's more powerful when someone speaks directly about what they went through." Ebony swallowed. Public speaking had never been something she excelled at. She avoided crowds, especially when it came to personal matters. But the memory of the officer's hands pinning her down burned in her mind. If her words could help enact change, maybe it was worth facing her fear. She nodded slowly. "I'll do it." The mayor offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Thank you. I'll have my office follow up on the details. And Malcolm." He turned to the teenager. "You have a brave son, Ms. Rogers. If he hadn't called, I might never have found out in time to intervene." Malcolm blushed, but looked the mayor in the eye, murmuring, "I just did what I had to do." Over the next few days, Ebony's life became a whirlwind of phone calls, paperwork, and emotional ups and downs. She managed to scrape together enough money for a new insurance policy, just a minimum coverage plan from a low-cost provider. She braced herself for the financial hit. With the mayor's assistance, and after many calls to the police impound lot, Ebony finally managed to retrieve her Honda. She felt an immense sense of relief as she turned the key and heard the engine sputter back to life. But the aftermath of the incident still weighed on her. She couldn't forget the disrespect, the fear, the sense of powerlessness. Nightmares plagued her, showing images of flashing lights, handcuffs, and Malcolm screaming for help. She found herself snapping at co-workers, and even at Malcolm, though she tried to swallow her frustration. A bright spot in this darkness came when the Chicago Community Justice Coalition, CCJC, finally returned her call. It turned out they were well aware of Ebony's situation. News about the woman whose son called the mayor had spread quickly in activist circles. They wanted to meet with her. So one afternoon, Ebony walked into the CCJC office, a small suite in an older building near Washington Park. The walls were lined with posters demanding justice equality and police accountability. She was greeted by Layla Graham, a passionate young organizer who invited Ebony to sit on a worn leather couch. Layla explained how CCJC had been helping individuals file complaints against excessive policing. "We have attorneys who can handle this pro bono, given the nature of your case," she said, pushing a folder of papers toward Ebony. Ebony blinked. "I can't afford an attorney." Layla gave a sympathetic smile. "You won't have to. We believe your case could be pivotal in our broader movement. And with the mayor's attention on you, it's a perfect time to push for real accountability." Ebony exhaled, relieved. The idea that help was finally within reach lifted a weight from her shoulders. Together they started drafting a formal complaint against the two officers who'd stopped her. Layla explained the process. It would likely involve a hearing or an internal affairs investigation. Ebony might have to testify, show medical evaluations if she had any bruising, and present the police records from that day. In that office, Ebony felt both overwhelmed and vindicated. If she had to stand up for herself, she wasn't going to be alone. Just as Ebony began to feel a measure of hope, a new wave of trouble arrived. Rumors spread that the local police union, the Fraternal Order of Police, was unhappy that a single traffic stop was getting so much attention, especially after the mayor had personally intervened. Some officers felt they were being thrown under the bus for just doing their jobs. Ebony first sensed the hostility when she noticed a squad car parked on her block more often than usual. She assumed it might be routine patrol, but something about the pointed stares from the officers inside set her on edge. Then one evening after her shift at the nursing home, Ebony walked into her apartment building and found a threatening note slipped under her door. It read, "Drop the complaint, or you'll regret it." She stared at the paper, her heart pounding. She locked her door immediately, checking all the windows, her hands shaking. Malcolm was in his room, earphones on, watching something on his tablet. Ebony fought the urge to cry. The next morning, she showed the note to Layla at the CCJC. Layla's expression hardened. "This is unacceptable. We're getting you a security detail for a few days. I'll talk to the mayor's office to arrange it." Ebony bit her lip. "A security detail? I don't want to draw more attention. What if it just makes the cops around me angrier?" Layla shook her head. "We can't let them intimidate you. You have every right to feel safe. This is a classic tactic. Don't back down." Ebony felt torn. She did want to stand firm, but fear gnawed at her. She had to think of Malcolm's safety above all else. The day of the town hall meeting arrived a large open event at the Harold Washington Library Auditorium. Community members, city officials, and media were set to attend. The mayor had invited Ebony to speak on a panel about policing. Layla and a CCJC attorney accompanied Ebony. Malcolm came too quiet but resolute, clinging to Ebony's side. The auditorium was packed, a bustling energy reverberating through the space. Cameras from local news stations lined the back wall. Mayor Jackson opened the event with a speech about the importance of community trust in law enforcement. Then he invited Ebony to the stage, introducing her as a brave mother who experienced what no law-abiding citizen should. Ebony's nerves crackled. She clutched the microphone, scanning the sea of faces. She spotted a few uniformed police officers in the crowd, arms folded, expressions grim. She swallowed, ignoring the dryness in her throat. In a shaky voice, she began, "My name is Ebony Rogers. I'm a single mother, a nurse's aide, and a lifelong resident of Chicago. 3 weeks ago, I was pulled over for expired insurance. That's on me. I let it lapse because I was struggling to pay my bills. But what happened next was not on me." She recounted the humiliating ordeal, the officers pinning her against the trunk, the fear, Malcolm's desperate call. The audience fell silent, some nodding in empathy, others shaking their heads in dismay. She felt tears threaten, but she forced herself to continue. "I'm not here to excuse my lack of insurance. I'm here because no one should be treated as a criminal for something like that. My son watched them shove me against a car while I cried. That's not policing. That's bullying. And we need change." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd. Ebony saw reporters scribbling notes, cameras zooming in. She caught the mayor's encouraging nod from the side of the stage, and at that moment she felt a surge of determination. She had a platform, and she would use it to protect not just herself, but others who faced similar mistreatment. In the days following the town hall, Ebony's story made headlines in local newspapers and evening news segments. Some praised her for speaking out, but not everyone was supportive. Online forums buzzed with comments, many sympathetic, but some accusing Ebony of seeking attention or freebies. She tried not to read them, but it was difficult not to peek. When she did, the hateful messages made her stomach churn. Another lazy person who doesn't pay her bills. She wants to cry racism to get a payday. If you can't afford insurance, don't drive. But Ebony also received messages of solidarity from other single mothers, from community members who'd experienced profiling from local activists. They shared their own experiences, urging her to keep fighting. Then came a subpoena. The officers in question were bringing a defamation claim against Ebony, alleging she had lied about their actions during the traffic stop and smeared their reputations publicly. Ebony's heart pounded as she read the legal language. Could they really do that? Layla and the CCJC attorney reassured her that it was likely a desperate move, a tactic to intimidate her into dropping her complaint. But Ebony still felt her anxiety skyrocket. "Great," she muttered to herself, pacing her small living room. "Now I'm being sued for telling the truth." Malcolm tried to comfort her, reminding her of how far they'd come. But Ebony's nightmares returned, accompanied by new stress over legal fees. Even if the CCJC attorneys were pro bono, she worried about the emotional toll and any potential outcome that might further destabilize her finances. Throughout the chaos, Ebony found strength in her son and in her community. Neighbors began stopping by with words of encouragement. One evening, Ebony's landlord, Ms. Tate, slipped a small note under her door. "You're doing the right thing. Proud of you." Ebony cried quietly when she read it. She also discovered an unexpected ally in Ms. Alvarez at the nursing home. When Ebony confided that she might need time off for court dates, Ms. Alvarez placed a gentle hand on Ebony's shoulder. "We'll figure it out. I believe in what you're doing." The city was buzzing with talk of Ebony's case. Some local politicians and community leaders offered public support, while a few tried to distance themselves from the controversy. But Ebony pressed forward. She filed a counterclaim for emotional distress and excessive force with the CCJC attorneys guiding her every step. In the middle of all this, Ebony received a call from the mayor's office inviting her to a private event with philanthropic donors. They wanted her to share her story, to help secure funding for police reform initiatives, as well as community programs that assist low-income families in obtaining auto insurance subsidies. Ebony was hesitant. These donors were wealthy from a different world, the kind of people she doubted had ever worried about car insurance lapsing. But she agreed, recognizing that bridging that gap could be powerful. Maybe it could prevent someone else from going through her nightmare. As the internal investigation ramped up, leaks from within the police department suggested the two officers who stopped Ebony had a checkered history. There were prior complaints about their conduct toward minority motorists, all suspiciously dismissed. Suddenly, Ebony's case no longer looked like an isolated incident. It appeared to be part of a pattern. Local news outlets began digging. A journalist from the Chicago Tribune knocked on Ebony's door one evening, asking for a comment about the officer's past records. Ebony, hesitant, directed the reporter to the CCJC. She couldn't risk accidentally saying something that might complicate her legal position, but she felt a sense of vindication growing. Behind the scenes, the police union fought tooth and nail to block the release of bodycam footage from that day. Ebony's attorney filed motions to obtain it as evidence. The mayor's office also pushed for transparency. After several heated days in court, the judge ruled the footage must be released. When Ebony finally saw the bodycam video, she wept. The video showed the tall officer twisting her arm, pinning her against the trunk, and the short officer rummaging aggressively through her glove compartment, ignoring her pleas. There was no narcotics search warrant, no probable cause except for her expired insurance. Malcolm's voice, frantic as he called for help, was audible from the passenger seat. "It's right to there," she gasped, tears in her eyes. "Everything they did. It's right there." Her attorney patted her hand gently. "This changes everything." The defamation suit against Ebony went to an initial hearing. The courtroom was small, packed with reporters and supporters. The two officers arrived with their attorney wearing stern expressions. Ebony could feel their hostility from across the aisle. The judge, an older woman with a calm demeanor, began proceedings. The officer's attorney argued that Ebony lied about being pinned down, claiming the officers were conducting a lawful stop, and that Ebony's statements in public were damaging their reputations. Ebony's attorney responded by playing the bodycam footage for the judge. The entire courtroom watched as Ebony was shoved and pinned. Audible gasps erupted. Ebony could barely look at the screen, tears streaming. She felt Malcolm's small hand on hers, trembling but offering comfort. When the footage ended, the judge turned to the officers. "I see no defamation here. Ms. Rogers' description of the event is consistent with the video evidence. This case, as presented, has no merit." The officers' faces reddened. Their attorney attempted to salvage some argument, but the judge dismissed the defamation claim outright. In a twist of poetic justice, the judge went further to question whether Ebony's countersuit might warrant immediate consideration. She scheduled a separate hearing stating Ebony's claim of excessive force and emotional distress had compelling preliminary evidence. Ebony could feel her heart pounding in her ears. This was more than she had hoped for. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled in her direction. "How do you feel right now?" "Ms. Rogers," Ebony paused, drawing a shaky breath. "I just want justice," she said, simply. Chapter 17. Hard Karma Strikes. The city's Internal Affairs Department completed its investigation, and in a rare outcome recommended disciplinary action against both officers. One of them, the shorter officer, was placed on administrative leave. The tall officer who had pinned Ebony was suspended without pay, pending a departmental hearing. As if that weren't enough, the state's attorney's office began reviewing other complaints that had previously been dismissed. It soon emerged that these two officers were part of a larger clique with a track record of aggressive, racially biased stops. The revelation ignited citywide outrage. Protests flared, demanding broader reform, chanting Ebony's name as a symbol of those who dared to stand up against injustice. The media dubbed it the Rogers Effect, highlighting how a single mother's courage, boosted by her son's desperate call, sparked a wave of accountability. Meanwhile, Ebony watched it all unfold with a sense of awe and relief. She still faced personal struggles. Bills, the stress of single parenthood, but a weight had lifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. Her voice, once dismissed, was now heard by thousands. Months after the incident, Ebony stood outside her apartment building on a sunny afternoon, watching Malcolm dribble a basketball on the sidewalk. He wore a bright grin, as if the heaviness of the past had finally lifted from their home. Her phone buzzed. It was Layla from CCJC, calling to let her know that the City Council had just passed a measure requiring more stringent oversight of traffic stops and new training programs for officers. It would be some time before changes took full effect, but it was progress, real progress. That evening, Ebony cooked a modest celebratory dinner spaghetti with meat sauce, Malcolm's favorite. As they ate, she told him the news. The City Council is making new rules for the police. He beamed, eyes shining with pride. "Ma, we did it." Ebony laughed softly. "I guess we did, but there's still a long way to go." Malcolm nodded seriously. "I know." After dinner, Ebony sat at her small table, the same one once cluttered with overdue bills. Now it held a mix of new possibilities. She'd received a letter from a local college offering her guidance on a scholarship for nursing school. A flyer from a family friend advertised a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. And an envelope contained a check from a fundraiser that local activists had organized for her. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to clear some debts and maybe put a little aside for an emergency fund. She still bore emotional scars from the ordeal, but she felt hope blossoming. Life had taken an unexpected turn, catapulting her into a fight she never wanted. Yet she'd emerged stronger, her story helping to spark a movement of reform in her city. A year after the incident, Ebony found herself back at City Hall, this time as a guest of honor at a community awards ceremony. The mayor introduced her, praising her bravery in speaking out and her dedication to improving the community. Ebony blushed, still uncomfortable with public acclaim. Malcolm, now a high school freshman, looked on proudly. He still had the phone that recorded the crucial call he made that day. He occasionally joked to Ebony, "Remember when I called the mayor? I'm never deleting that number." Life wasn't magically easy. Ebony continued working long hours, but with the city's new pilot program for subsidized auto insurance, she no longer feared losing coverage. She enrolled in night classes to advance her nursing career. Malcolm excelled in school, buoyed by the sense that if he could face down a system that once threatened his mother, he could achieve anything. As Ebony left City Hall that evening, the crisp air filled her lungs. She remembered the numb terror she'd felt the day she was handcuffed, how the world had seemed bleak and uncaring. Now she understood the power a single voice could hold especially when joined by others seeking justice. She looked at Malcolm. He was gawky tall and wearing his perpetual grin. He gave her a playful nudge. "Proud of you, Ma," he said softly. Ebony looped an arm around his shoulders. "I'm proud of you too, baby." They walked together down the steps, stepping into the bustling Chicago night heart's light with the promise of a better tomorrow. In a city where countless voices go unheard, Ebony Rogers showed us how one determined mother and her courageous son can spark a catalyst for change. She faced the unimaginable humiliation, fear, and threats, yet never backed down. With her son's bold phone call to the mayor, Ebony shattered the silence that too often surrounds police misconduct. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her own dignity. She ignited a movement toward accountability and reform. This is the power of resilience, proof that the loudest call for justice can resonate from the most humble of places. If this story inspired you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, no matter the odds, then please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Together we can amplify stories like Ebony's and champion the changes our communities need. Your support matters, and your voice could be the next call for change.